Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Disc and Dice podcast, episode number 46. My name is Paul, and I am joined once again back to the original crew, Timmy and JT. How are you guys going?
Hello. Whoa, I cut you off.
Good evening.
That's how excited I am to be here.
Yeah, you're back.
Absolutely. You guys let me off real easy. Like I listened to the podcast out of fear to make sure I knew what I was coming back to.
We
You
tried.
were potentially mods for a little bit, but I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that's neither good nor bad, depending on where you're from.
You temporarily recast me, but then in a Shyamalan twist, it turned out to be Moz all along.
We tried to, do something like that, but Moz he chickened out right at the start, I feel like.
There was a lot of potential for stuff to happen. Let's put it that way. But yeah, so Moz, if you're listening, you ruined the last episode intro. So next time you're on, please make more effort to make it funnier.
I'd go further than that, JT. I'd say you will never hear Moz on this podcast again.
At least not as Moz.
Maybe Moz can come back as Timmy. We can reverse the roles around again.
We can just have a presenter fluid podcast.
So people may have noticed my voice is a bit reverby here, so it might sound a little bit different to normal. That's because I'm recording from a new house where, speaking of games, I've been playing the cooperative construction game that's called Building IKEA Furniture, which Timmy and I we've played that game co-op in the past before, local co-op at his old house.
We had a LAN party.
We did. It's a pretty fun one. It's a good puzzle game. I don't know if you're into that genre, JT, at all.
I hate that genre. I dread having to ever play that game ever again. But I know, as a member of a couple who is now saving up to buy a house, that is something we'll have to look forward to play in the very near future.
See, I guess Paul and I only really half like the genre for the genre itself. What we were really excited for was we were building those bookcases for my comic books so that we could go through and alphabetize them all, which is another shared passion of ours.
That's a game I also enjoy as well, the organizational game. I feel like that scratches the same itch as things like that, like Car Mechanic Simulator that you talked about a few episodes ago, JT. I think that's they're in the same ballpark in terms of the parts of your brain that they trigger. It's like virtually changing wheels on cars is the same as putting all your stuff in whatever order you've chosen to put it in on a shelf.
Yeah, that really mundane entertainment.
Yeah, because we're sitting there going, so do we alphabetize it all? Or do we need to put it into publishers first? So alphabetize Marvel and then DC and then Image. And then do we alphabetize the publishers? There's so many layers for us to delve into.
You guys might be onto something here. You guys could get together, get a small team of developers behind you, and make maybe the world's most boring video game.
Hey, look, considering we're a video game or a games podcast, I feel like this is something that actually would be interesting to more of our listeners than we expect. So I'm genuinely curious because I've been mainly putting books on bookshelves as we've been moving into our new place. That's the main organization thing that I've done. And I'm kind of a little bit torn over how to organize those because I can't just do it alphabetically by author, because then you end up with, all your non-fiction in with your fiction and stuff like that. And I can't have that at all. But then if you try to go by genre, there's stuff that always kind of crosses over and you don't know quite where to put it. Do you guys have a system for this stuff?
For me, my favorite author by a country mile is Michael Connelly. So I've got 30 of his novels and they're all the same size. So it's all built around making sure they have a single shelf all to themselves. And because they all look nice because they have matching spines, then I feel less worried about a lot of the other stuff. I do tend to keep non-fiction and fiction separate, but really it's about the height of the books. I make sure they taper down nicely. Like the big ones are all together, and then the small ones are all together.
I totally
There is
get that, because I have recently, like, I used to hate this, but I've come around to it. I like the really stacked bookshelf now. Like, not everything vertical, but the books horizontally stacked on top of other books. I've come around to that
Ooh.
as a thing. And so,
That is the good stuff.
yeah, that's been what you're talking about, Timmy, has been very important, because I've got to get a bunch of like equal sized books in terms of height together, because otherwise you can't stack other things on top if they're uneven. So that's like throwing another variable into the mix there about how to do this. But JT, I think I cut you off there before. How do you approach this?
I was just going to say that for me, there is no hope, because I walk into most bookstores and I'm like, what is this doing in here? Like, there's, if a bookstore doesn't have a real clear system that I like, there's nothing that's going to appease me in that regard. So that, and we don't have a whole lot of books on display. Actually, no, you know what? That's a lie. I've just forgotten about under our staircase. There is an entire wall of books, mostly nursing books for Talia's studies and profession, but I digress. There, we do have books, and I've completely forgotten about them.
My brother's partner has arranged her books on their bookshelves in terms of color, and so it's just like every book that is red goes together, and then every book that is blue goes together, and so on. And while I would find that incredibly frustrating when I needed to find the book I wanted, it does look amazing when you look at the bookshelf.
I do that in small bursts around the home, So like I've got my main bookshelf, and I'm not, putting a color gradient like across every shelf. But like you'll remember, like I had, one book out of place in my The Walking Dead collection because the spine was yellow, and I needed it to go with a bunch of other yellow books on a display shelf.
This is the kind of stuff that matters, guys.
This is what people tune in for.
It is. One last thing on this, Timmy. You've kind of inspired me now when you talked about how like the Michael Connolly section is the kind of the central focus of your shelf, because I feel like the bookshelf that I have been organizing here, it's like half books and some games and movies, but there's a whole shelf that is all Star Wars, and it's like my Star Wars movie collection from the VCRs all the way up to the Blu-rays. And I feel like now I'm going to rearrange the whole thing so that the Star Wars shelf is like the central piece on that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good move. It's like every big family gathering meal, you have a centerpiece on the table. So that can be your collection centerpiece, and it all spirals out from there.
Right. That's what I'm going for. But I feel like we've talked enough about how we organize our shelves. We can come back to this if people think it's it's worth an entire discussion topic. Do let us know, or maybe don't let us know. But we should move on to some games, I reckon. So, what have you guys been playing?
Well, I have been playing as recently as 15 minutes before we started this podcast, Among Us. Essentially, I was aware of it because the boys would watch YouTube videos of it or want to download it, and we knew it was vaguely violent, so like it wasn't allowed, but so we would be asked about it a lot, right? We heard it. And the other day, I think it was Shayla. Actually, you know what it was? I downloaded it because I was curious, and I went, okay, so this is what this game is about. And Shayla went, oh yeah, I actually downloaded that, just a couple of weeks ago. And so we got to playing it. It's kind of the talk of the internet at the moment. I see lots of stuff about it. Before I jump into it, have either of you guys had much in the way of experience with this one yet?
I have played a very minimal amount. Probably not enough to have like a really decent opinion of the game, but I have played it. And yeah, I mean, do you want to know now what I think about what I have played? Or, yeah, I mean, it's because like my opinion is sort of very skewed by other things I've seen on the internet for it, as opposed to my actual experience. But my experience was very similar to the sorts of criticisms that I was reading on the internet as well.
Well, all right. Well, let's hold off there, and we'll go for what you know of it, Paul.
Yeah. Maybe yeah, before we go into that, because I have heard a lot about this game, but I haven't played it at all. So, and even having heard a lot about it, I haven't really got a grasp of what it is in a sense. Like, JT, you've explained it a little bit to me in person when we were talking about it, but I still don't really kind of get what the game is beyond like the little I've heard. So maybe like for me and other people who haven't played it, can you fill me in on that?
Absolutely. So, I went in pretty blind as well. So, like, I didn't really have any preconceived notions. But essentially, the game is you are one of up to 10 workers on like a spaceship or a space station, or like there's three maps. One's a spaceship, one's a space station, and one is kind of like, I guess, a space station, but on Earth. And you all have tasks to do to keep the ship running. And among you is 1 to 3 imposters. So you can customize just about every setting in this game. And I go into more detail later. But I think the version that most people play, because it's kind of like the default version, is 10 players. One of you is an imposter. The imposter is able to sabotage different parts of the ship and also kill other people. Everybody else is trying to do tasks, and they are trying to fix the things that are being sabotaged, keep the ship running. Everybody has tasks assigned to them. You can also call an emergency meeting if you want to accuse anybody, but if someone finds a body, they can report it, and then it goes into a discussion mode, and then you can all choose to vote someone out if you want to. So I kind of rushed that there, but Paul, to put it in a statement, you are the crew of a spaceship. One of you is an imposter. You were trying to work out who the imposter is before that imposter kills you all.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of like it's like a deception game
It
in that
absolutely
sense.
is, yeah.
And
Yeah.
in terms of like it as a video game, like how do you play it? Is it like it's like a first person game, a third person game, like a text based DOS game? You know, like what's that side
Oh,
of it?
wow. Okay. So we haven't even seen a picture of it.
No,
Alrighty,
I've only
forgive me.
heard about
It's
it.
it's isometric. It's really cartoony. Like, it's very obviously drawn by hand. It's very cutesy. Everybody's kind of like, they look like Grimace, like from McDonald's, except with like a bubble for a face because you're wearing spacesuits. But yeah, essentially it's isometric. You can see everybody. You're running around. I'm going to start explaining the gameplay because I feel like you need that to kind of explain, understand what I'm talking about. But when I say that everybody has tasks, it's things like you need to go to the admin part of the ship and swipe your ID card. And so for you, when you go down and do that, you walk to that part of the ship and you press the use button, and then it opens up your wallet and you tap on the card, and then you need to manually swipe it through the card swiping thing. So, like, that pops up on top of the isometric view of the ship. So it's kind of like a comic panel popping up there, an image panel. And I played it on mobile phone first, but I have been playing it on PC also. So on the phone, you swipe it with your finger. If you swipe it too fast, it goes too fast. Please swipe again. If you go too slow, please swipe again. If you swipe it if you swipe it like the right speed, but you kind of do it crooked, it goes bad read, and you have to do it again. Now, the reason why these seemingly mundane tasks become important is because you are working as a group to all complete all the tasks the ship or the station requires of you. And they become stressful because I said that panel pops up on top of the isometric view. And suddenly you stop being able to see what the people around you are doing or if anyone's come into the room. So when there's a killer among you, you want to do that task quickly because it's stressful. Going, all right, I'm going to be blind for a moment here. And so you swipe it. Uh, and the longer you take to do it, the more stressful it becomes because someone could be sneaking up on you, you know? Uh, sometimes you might want to run around with one of the other players that you've noticed kind of doing stuff and that you feel is safe so that you're not alone when you're doing these tasks. But you can't talk to anybody. There's no team speak or anything like that. It has absolutely no function for physically talking to anybody. And in fact, when you read the how to play, it says if you're playing this locally with like people you're sitting with, you are not allowed to talk until you get to the discussion points. Now, I mentioned the admin task. That's just one. That's a pretty common one. And a lot of the time, everybody has to do it because there are three types of tasks: common tasks, short tasks, and long tasks. Common tasks means everybody has that same task in their list of, 4 to 7, however many the host of the game decided to add in. Short tasks are normally kind of like that admin swipe one. It's pretty quickly. Or it's, there'll be a wiring panel on the wall and you have to connect the red wire to the red wire and the blue to the blue and the yellow to the yellow, those kinds of things. Then there are long tasks, and it'll be like go to the weapons part of the ship and shoot down the asteroids that are threatening the ship. And so you have to shoot 20 of them. So you're actually sitting there for ages. And if you leave out of that task, you have to start over again. So it's not like shoot a few, check you're okay, go back into it. You have to commit to that task. So you're managing your tasks and you are trying to keep an eye on everybody else. Because, like I said, you can't talk during the game, but if someone comes across a body somewhere, they can choose to report it. And that stops everything. All of a sudden, you're all pulled into a discussion point, and it's like instant messaging. And so, normally, I have found that a shorthand has developed for Among Us. Pretty much as soon as it happens, everybody just writes where, because when it says that a body has been reported, you can see who's doing the reporting. So I can see that the white player reported it. And so everyone's going where and waiting for white to say, I found him in the storage part of the ship. And then we can see who's dead, but if there's more than one person who's been killed and they're only reporting on this body, we need to say, all right, it was the dark blue character and their body was found in storage. And so then everybody's like, was there anyone nearby? Da, 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 da. And at this point, you have the opportunity to say, hey, I have been running around with Pink the whole time. They seem like they're pretty safe and Pink will vouch for you. And then someone else can say, I saw Brown and they went to weapons and it looked like they were pretending to shoot the asteroids, but I could tell that they weren't really doing it. Because here's the interesting thing. Some tasks look like you're just standing next to a wall doing nothing, right? Because you're doing wiring. No one else can see the panel that's popped up for you. Only you see that. But some of them, like shooting the asteroids or taking a scan in the medbay, you actually see things in the world. Like if you're doing a scan in medbay, this kind of green grid comes up and down over you. So if you're, sorry, and I've just realized I haven't mentioned a very important thing. The imposter can't do tasks for real. They can only kill or sabotage. So they need to pretend to be doing tasks, but they can't actually activate or interact with the things on the ships like everybody else. So they need to pick the tasks that you can just stand there and conceivably be assumed that you're really doing it. But there's only so many of those. So they can't just like run around to each of those things and play it safe because eventually someone's going to go, hey, the green player has been standing in front of the wiring panels the whole game and doing nothing else. Like you can only do each task once normally. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a game of you have to watch everybody else. You have to get your tasks done. You have to trust the right people. But you also have to hope that you get a talkative group of people because there's nothing worse when you get a group of people. Like I've been mostly playing just like online in random groups and they just don't talk and they just want to vote or they just talk stupid stuff. Like there's heaps of people in there at the moment who are just getting in there and like saying something about the US election, or they'll call an emergency meeting and be like, hey, are there any chicks in this game? Like dumb stuff like that. And that could be a shame. And I think this is kind of what JT's been but for me, that's been like 1 out of every maybe, I don't know, 8 games has been with a dud group. And, I've been having a lot of luck with people actually having some pretty cool discussions.
Just quickly then, before maybe you guys jump into your impressions, how does the process work when you think you know who the like traitor or imposter is? Like, like you said, kind of voting. Does someone sort of nominate and then everyone votes? Like, what's
So,
that
so,
process?
so what happens is there are two ways a vote can be triggered. If somebody comes across a body and they choose to report it, it immediately goes into a discussion. And one of the ways you can customize the game is you can choose how long you have to discuss before you can vote and how long the voting window is. So, for example, you can choose up to like 3 minutes for each of those. Most of the time, people choose like 15 seconds of discussion and a minute to a minute and a half of voting. And before you freak out about that, you can continue discussing for the entire voting window as well. It's just the discussion time is you're not allowed to vote until the discussion time has elapsed. So, to go back to the question at hand, if you report a body, everybody gets pulled straight into a discussion, and you can do that from anywhere. You see a body, it gives you the option to report, and it just pauses the game for everybody while you chat. The other way to start a vote is you can run back to the central area of each map, which is normally in the cafeteria, and there is an emergency meeting button, and you can press that for any reason, but you are limited per game to how many times you can do that. So it's normally one or two for each player. And again, just so you understand the mechanism, Paul, what happens is it opens up, you'll discuss, and then you have just like a grid with each player in there. So their name and their color, and you can tap on it to vote on one of them, or you can tap skip the vote. And whoever has the most votes gets eliminated. If the most votes go to skip, it's skipped. If there is a tie, nobody gets eliminated.
Okay, and so in terms of like winning the game, the imposter just has to like be the last one left if people are being eliminated. Is it that kind of thing?
Once there is only one person left with the imposter wins. Or,
Right.
like I said, they can sabotage some stuff. They can sabotage like the oxygen in the ship, or they can set the reactor into meltdown, and those become priorities for everyone else on the ship. Because if you get like 30 seconds for two people to get over to the reactor and shut it down, or there's two different places you have to go to get the oxygen back on track, and again, it's a timer counting down. So, if people aren't able to get there, or they all assume someone else is going there for whatever reason, the imposter can win like that. Essentially, at any rate, it's killing everybody, but there's just a couple of ways to go about it.
Right. Okay.
And the instructions seem to imply that the crewmates can win by completing all of their tasks, but I have never seen it done. Because there's a bar, like a task meter up the top, and it shows you how much of your tasks need to be done. And every time the imposter sabotages something, it goes down a little bit. And I've also seemingly had it completely full, and the game didn't end. So I'm a little unsure of how that end state is achieved.
All right. So I feel like I've got a pretty good sense of how the game works from your description, Timmy. So
Yep.
I guess the next logical thing is, what do you guys think of this game?
Well, Shayla and I are absolutely obsessed. We are playing so much of it and having a really, really good time. Like I mentioned, it really does depend on the group you're playing with. I feel like we've been pretty lucky and gotten a lot of good people. You know, when you're playing with 10 people and they're all random, a lot of the time, you're going to get a couple of people who don't say a lot or who aren't very good or say dumb stuff. But, as long as the majority are there and actually giving information and stuff, it trucks along pretty cool. I want to mention like the customizability of this game is like crazy. Like the person who's hosting the game can change everything, like how fast you can move. Like sometimes you'll be playing a game and you are speeding around there because they've said the movement speed is times 2.75. So you're nearly at 3 times whatever the normal sprite speed is and stuff like that. You can customize how far you can see in a hallway, and you can do that for the imposter and the crewmates separately. So you can say, the imposter has a limitation on how far they can see, or they can move a little bit faster, or whatever you want to do. You can change the amount of tasks everybody has to do. You can change how many emergency meetings you can call. Like, you can change just about every single setting in the game. And considering how simple it seems to be, um, I think it's actually quite clever.
So I think what you were mentioning before to me, for my experience, which was a whole two short games, I think I did get that, like you said, one in 8 games or something like that, or 2 in 10 games are, can be a bit trash. I think my experience was those unfortunate sort of games where the group was just terrible. And that's the way you explained it was exactly how it played out for me. So, I mean, I really don't think I've played enough to say that this game is one way or the other. Only that I think I do need to play it a bit more so I can get those, the more genuine experience.
Yeah,
Um,
I think playing it a bit more is the way to go as well, just because when you get into a good group, at the end of that game, you can either choose quit or play again. And when you go play again, it gives priority into your room of like everybody who was already in there that said play again. So obviously the people who were taking it seriously and stuff will come back into it. And like, there were a few people that Shayla and I played like 5, 6 games in a row together, and then a couple without them. And then we noticed them again, like pop into a room. So that was pretty cool. And also when we were hosting our own games, even though we were still playing with kind of like randoms and stuff, um, if there was someone that was just taking the piss, we just booted them, and you can ban them from being able to re-enter your room, and then someone else random comes in, and with a bit of luck, you end up with a mostly pretty good room.
Yeah, I think that's, definitely the way to go is if you can find an established group, or a dedicated group, even in, a short amount of period or short period of time, I should say, or, people that you do play with often who also like to play the game uh, genuinely, then I think that sounds like, the way to get the good kind of experience that you're talking about. Um, One thing I did want to mention is when I first saw this game, I was like, this looks a lot like a game called Space Station 13, which is essentially Among Us on steroids, but it sort of obviously it predates Among Us by, I don't know, like a decade or something, maybe even 2 decades. But it has a very dedicated player base. Um, but it has all the things that Among Us have in it, but just to the most granular level you can possibly think of. And I don't want to turn this discussion into Space Station 13, but I did find it really interesting. Not to say that they ripped it off or anything, but it really looks like they did take all the aspects of Space Station 13 that people play that game for, like the imposter stuff and the doing tasks and um, you know being able to change and customize some of the game aspects. Obviously, it being on a space station as well,
Mhm.
but it looks like they really did actually manage to simplify it so that it's a bit. It's that kind of same kind of experience, but easier to play because Space Station 13 is like next level learning curve. Like I'd say it's actually one of the hardest games I've ever played in terms of understanding everything you can do in the game.
Well,
So
yeah, like that. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. What Among Us has done is stripped it right down to make it really accessible, because
yeah,
you're
yes.
getting all ages and from all over the world in there, because it's so quick to get into a game. The games don't necessarily take long. Like, we played some long ones where like the imposters were really good and careful and stuff, but a lot of the games would go for a couple of minutes. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so this kind of game is great because it has all the great hallmarks of the imposter genre. Because there are a few games in that genre that currently exist that I know of, like Trouble in Terrorist Town, which is a Gmod game mode. Obviously, and yeah, and Space Station 13. So it's great that they've managed to sort of streamline and simplify those aspects to a broader audience, which is good.
Yeah, I think they've even managed to streamline, the setting up a game and stuff. Like, it's so simple. If I want to play a game with my friends, but we don't have 10 people, I can create a game and say I want up to 10 people. and put it on private, give them all the code, and they can all join. And then I just tap the button where it says private, and it goes bam public, and anyone else can fill in the rest of the room. It's so simple, like it's made so accessible. And there was just one other function that I wanted to mention because Paul, I think you might actually find this one really interesting. When you are running around the space station in your little isometric view, the way you can view what is around you, you've kind of got a cone in front of you which is quite large and then a smaller cone behind you, and it limits like how far you can see because it's like a top down view, but of course it's unrealistic for someone in a space suit in a space station being able to see like hundreds of meters down a hallway. It kind of shows you where you can see and like kind of shadows out the rest. And
That
then
sounds familiar, doesn't it, Paul?
Yeah, it sounds
is
like
that like
Zomboid.
Zomboid? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was at that, yeah. And then if the imposter sabotages the lights, that diminishes massively, and it's actually really hard to see anybody until they're right in front of you.
That does sound cool. Like you said, Timmy, like it sounds appealing to me, and I did have like a couple of questions, and one of them is kind of related to that, to the fact that it sounds appealing, because I do feel like sometimes on the podcast where we're all a bit guilty of when someone else talks about a game, we kind of say like, oh, maybe I'll give that a go. And we never ever do, like we never ever try the games that we say we'll try. But the three of us these days really don't have anything that we can all play together. And this sounds like pretty, I just had a look, it costs like $7 on Steam. It sounds pretty like accessible. Does it have cross-platform play? Because Timmy, you say you were playing it on phone, yeah?
It absolutely does. All you need is to put in the code, and it doesn't matter if you're on PC or if you're on a mobile device. You'll be in the same room. Shayla and I have played both on PCs, both on phones, one on each of the other. And yeah, not a problem. And you're absolutely right. The other day after we tried it for the first time, I was going to try and convince JT and Talia to play with us because I knew we were having a video chat that evening. But you kind of need more than 4 people. And I hadn't really understood the filling in the room private and public yet. So yeah, we can absolutely do it for sure.
And it can scratch that Avalon itch that we haven't been able to play for a long, long time. Avalon, for the people who don't know, is a card or board game based imposter game, which is excellent. And this sort of obviously has elements of that.
I would go so far as to say Avalon is the disc and dice deception game of choice.
Yes. I was going to give a rundown of the years just then, like for the years 2017, 2018, 2019. I forgot how long the podcast was actually going for. So
it is back to back to back to back to back deception game champ.
Yeah, they should definitely start putting that on the box when they sell Avalon.
But yeah, that's Among Us. Like, I reckon it's worth you persevering with a little bit, JT. And I'm glad I had this opportunity to kind of like explain this all to you, Paul, as well. Just because I feel like you would have definitely run the risk of bouncing off of it based on other people as well.
Yeah, like I said, I'd heard a lot about it, and while you guys were chatting there, I did kind of just like quickly look at a trailer on my other monitor just so I could get a sense of the visuals of it. And I probably would have unfairly written it off based on the kind of art style, and I probably wouldn't have looked into it any further. So yeah, I am interested now, and it sounds like it could be a good one for us all to play together. Yeah, maybe then it's something that we'll revisit in a future episode. But for now, let's move on to you, JT, because as we say many, many times on here, you're these sort of quests that you go on as you work your way through various series. Regular listeners will know about your Doom saga, and they will have heard about the Assassin's Creed saga, and you're gonna give us the next installment. I'm really looking forward to this one.
I'm glad you are, because I feel like we left it on a bit of a sour note when we were talking about Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. I feel like as much as I enjoyed the game, we really did just sort of dunk on it pretty hard, because it did have a lot of shortcomings. And I think the Assassin's Creed series in general is it's divisive, isn't it? It's you got to have a lot of people who play it and praise it, and a lot of people who are sort of opposed to the Ubisoft sort of uh, way of making games that's very apparent in that series. But I'm now up to Black Flag, and this for a lot of people is the 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 climax of the series in terms of playability, how much fun do you have in the game. This is the one that I always hear people recommend, or the one that I hear people starting the series at. You know, they didn't play 3 or 2 or anything. They just sort of went straight for Black Flag, and um, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that it is an absolute step up from Assassin's Creed 3, and it might be my favorite in the series so far.
That is interesting. Like I think we've talked about it before, and I've talked about how I could never get into this one, and I kind of played a couple of hours, so that was it. But you're right. I've sort of often heard this one talked about as kind of almost the peak of that. I don't know. It's almost like the middle era of Assassin's Creed. You know that like 3 doesn't get a lot of good press. People love this one. And then after this one, sort of the responses to the next 2 or 3 are pretty middling. And maybe
Well,
sort of in the modern era, since they kind of went to Egypt, it seems like it's got a better response. But in that sort of the kind of like, I don't know, what is it, like the post Ezio sort of era of Assassin's Creed, this seems to be the one that people pick out.
not to draw us into another debate, but it's kind of like the Force Awakens of the franchise. You know, like it was, it came off something that was disliked, and it kind of gave everybody like hope for the future again. Like it was an all new cast. We were done with the Desmond stuff. So where's it going to go from here? What are we going to get? And so people kind of like really enjoyed it. And then yeah, the next one's kind of mixed reviews at best.
Yeah, Timmy,
Yeah.
could you let us know what your dog thinks of this game?
My dog thinks that the cat should leave him alone.
All right, so yeah, I'm interested to hear about it. Like I said, because I haven't really dug into this much. Timmy, I'm pretty sure you've said you've played this. So, like, yeah, JT, how far through this one are you?
Well, I can actually give you a percentage because, like all great Assassin's Creed games, it does actually tell you how much you've completed. Um, Obviously, that's like from a completionist aspect. So, collecting collectibles and visiting areas and things. Um, I have done precisely 51%. So, in terms of the story, I'm not sure if I'm halfway through. I'd probably say I'm closer to a third of the way through if I know how large the game is. Um, Not saying I know too many spoilers or really any in regards to the latter part of the story. So I'd say I'm a third of the way through the story, um, but 50 halfway through the entire game. So make of that what you will.
Do you reckon that's because of like the sheer amount of other stuff to do in the game? Like when you say you finished a third of the story, but somehow you finished 51% of the game. Normally it's kind of like the other way around, right? Like once you finished the story, you finished, like, I don't know, at least 80% of the game, or like maybe 75% if it's a big open world kind of RPG style thing. So if you've done, you know, so much more. Is it like you're doing lots of side stuff or like collecting all the collectibles you can? Like, how do you think that's shaking out?
Oh, it's 100%. It's got to be right. Like I am very much doing the story like I do with a lot of open world games like Skyrim and Oblivion and Fallout. I tend to go and see an area and try and complete everything in that one area and then move on to the story like after I've done that. And that's exactly what I'm doing in this instance as well. And it makes it very hard to break out of that sort of that way I play it because the map is literally broken up into like actual hard line cut areas. So I'm like, I can't move into the story mode in the next section because I haven't got all the animus fragments from this one yet. So I'm constantly sort of making myself complete an area before I actually go and experience a new one where like a story mission might be. So that's definitely what it is, Timmy. There's a lot that you can do in the game. But that being said, I still haven't experienced everything you can do. And I don't mean that in the sense of completing storyline. I mean that in the sense of different types of like things that are in the game. So up until just recently, I only just uh, experienced the diving bell missions, which are sort of like optional missions where you uh, explore a part of the map that is actually underwater, and that didn't really come about until just recently, and quite far in the story, I might add. Um, so there's still a lot of things that I expect that I haven't really done in the game from a gameplay point of view. So yeah, it's not just large in the sense that it's like a big map, but you're doing the same thing and grinding over and over again. I'm still doing little things that I haven't done yet. So I'm really glad that they've fleshed it out in that way because that's something that three definitely didn't have. You've sort of finished all you can do very quickly, and then it was just sort of like rinse and repeat.
Now, JT, can I take you back a little bit here though? Because we kind of like jumped into talking about stuff very vaguely and at a high level, but Paul was right. This was one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games. Like, the only one I ever finished was two, but I reckon I liked this one the most. It's just so overwhelming that I went on to other things and never came back. And now it's fortuitous that we're talking about this on today, the launch of the PS5, because I actually got this game as my launch title for PS4, which I got on launch day.
Ah,
So we've come full circle, and you know I kind of want to bring us back to the story a little bit, because we haven't really mentioned that, and you could probably guess from the title, but this is Assassin's Creed but pirates, and you start off as you're the captain of a pirate ship, and JT, in my memory, I recall it starts with him almost immediately killing an assassin and stealing his blade and the papers on him and kind of just like taking up the assassin role. And I remember, although immediately after that, the story got much more interesting and I really appreciated it, I found it pretty lazy that they just, oh, you're an assassin now, and you didn't really need any training or to find anybody to tell you, oh, this is what that is, and this is what you're doing now, and this is the order. Just kind of dumped you in it with the abilities and the weapons, and kind of went, all right, go. And I guess for the fourth or technically sixth game in a series, some people would appreciate that. From a narrative point of view, I found it really jarring. Now, am I misremembering that? Did you feel similarly?
did absolutely feel similarly, and I actually went back and read some of the supplementary stuff. Like, so when you can pause and then you can go to a database and read a bit about sort of like environments and characters. Um, I realized that I was surely when things were being explained at the time during the gameplay, I may have. I don't think I skipped anything, but I may have been distracted by something else. But when I went back to it and looked at it, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Um, Lazy, I'm not sure if it's the right word, but it definitely does throw the character into the deep end a little bit too quickly. And I think that comes across to the players as like, how is this guy an assassin already? When in actual fact, he doesn't really know what the assassin order is. He just knows that this guy has access to the assassin that he kills and takes the identity of. He just
I
knows that he's at access to like rich and powerful people that the pirate can then exploit, and that's sort of where it goes in, and that part of it makes sense to me in retrospect. But I do agree that it probably didn't do a great job of driving that point home when you first play the game.
Yeah, I suppose it's just like he's meant to be a bit of a rogue and a vagabond, and he finds a weapon, so he's going to pick it up and he's going to use it, right? But because it happens so quickly and you don't have a feel for the character at all, you don't get that. So I suppose lazy might not be fair, but
I
perhaps not
think
the best writing
rushed.
in the world.
I think
Yeah,
I think it did feel like they really wanted to just put you into the driver's seat to be an assassin very quickly, and it probably did so at the expense of the opening narrative.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that you experienced the same thing. I'm also glad to hear that you looked into a bit more and the context was there. I still don't think that it necessarily is a redeeming quality if you have to go into all the optional lore and stuff to to fully understand the character that you are playing. But at least the thought was there.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you one more? I don't want to like absolutely take over your game, but do you mind if I ask you one more question about the story stuff?
Go. Yep.
Um, how did you feel about the present timeline stuff? I describe it as like in the last one, like it's a clandestine organization experimenting with animus, and in Black Flag, you're just an intern at Google.
Yeah. Look, I kind of I like it. I liked it way more than the ham-fisted conspiracy stuff that the other games were going for. Um, but the thing is that, like, because I didn't play them when they came out, I just didn't. I just don't know if I got the writing playing it so late. But I actually really liked what I really did appreciate is the shift to a anonymous sort of first person figure that you turn into. You're just sort of like you said, this intern, but you have no character. You're just a guy who works there. And I kind of liked that because it stripped back all the silliness of the present day stuff from the past games and then put it a bit more in the moment. Um, and then you're able to just focus obviously on the story for the past adventures. That being said, I haven't played enough of the game where I've really done much of the present day stuff. I've only just come into contact with some of the characters from the previous games, so I don't know how that's going to pan out. It could fall on its ass completely, so that remains to be seen.
I still feel like no one is playing any of these Assassin's Creed games because they're thinking, oh, I really want to know what happens in the modern world storyline. Like it's these
Yeah,
games are like 99.9% about the historical setting each time. Like that, the marketing every time they announce a new one is like, oh, this one's about Vikings. It's never like, oh, in the modern world, you're going to be in Berlin or something like that. No one cares
absolutely.
about
Yeah,
that. Like I almost find it a bit. I'm a bit incredulous at the fact that they've even continued to try and keep that going. Like, why don't they just like? It was interesting at first when I played the first Assassin's Creed. I didn't know that was in the game, and it was a really cool almost twist to find out that like that's how this was going to be framed. But I just feel like at this point they're not even about that in any way. Like just drop it, just make like historical third person action games because like that's what everyone wants.
yeah, I 100% agree with that, and it's the part of the game that kind of makes me roll my eyes and has in all the other games as well, not just this one. Um, so I'm definitely not praising it uh, for them changing it up, but they did turn it into something a little bit easier to play, a little bit more easier to digest in regards to how you have a present day storyline going crossing over with uh, a past history. But that being said, I really, really do hope, and I know nothing about any of the games after the one I'm playing right now. I really hope that this is just like they're letting that idea down really softly to the point where, like, at some point in one of the future games that I'll play, it probably won't even really be there outside of the user interface.
I gotta,
Oh,
I
oh,
gotta
my dear,
disappoint you,
poor sweet
JT.
chum,
I have heard
sweet
that.
innocent boy.
Yeah, I've heard that in Valhalla, it's like it's back with a vengeance. It's a big part of it.
Oh no.
It was there
Some
in Origins, so it's not like it even has to come back from far.
someone at Ubisoft needs to get fired. Let's just put that out there right now. But no, look, one of the things that I really do love in this game is not not one of the thing I love about this game is the historical aspect, and it's really quite cool because in all the dialogue, like written or said in terms of subtitles, I noticed that all the nouns have capitalizations. Not just like proper nouns like we are talking about today. Every single noun, and I had to look it up, and that's apparently how in that era was how things were written. Nouns were always capitalized. So it's a cool little things like that in there that are obviously like historical accuracies or historical references. But yeah, I thought that was a neat little addition that some other people might play it and be like, what is this? Why is it written like this?
One of the mechanics that is kind of a big selling point, I guess, of this game is the ship stuff. So like the naval combat and the naval kind of everything, which was sort of almost like a little bit of a side mechanic in Assassin's Creed 3. How are you enjoying that, JT? Because I always loved that in Assassin's Creed 3. And if I was going to go back to 4, it would be because I wanted that naval combat mechanic.
Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite part of the game. The normal running around stuff is obviously very much the same as it always has been. I don't play that and be like, wow, they've made this different. And I would almost say that it's very much the other way around to how it was in 3, and even how I've heard they wanted it to be in 4. In 4, they wanted it to still be a big part of the game, but supplementary to everything else. I'd say that it is absolutely the draw point of the game, and the cruising around in ships, customizing your ships, like going after different types of ships and difficulties to get different types of loot from them, choosing whether or not you want to like destroy a ship and get half its loot, or board it and then take all its loot and then send it to another mini game called Edward's Fleet, I think. Kenway's Fleet. Basically, it's like a mini game that you were able to play on your phone, but you can play it in the game now. Yeah, it's the best part of the game by a mile for me, and I really enjoy it. So I'm glad they made it a huge focus point.
That's good to hear. Like the little bit I did play of it, like that stuff was really fun, and I love that kind of it's part of the game, not just in terms of combat, but in terms of just moving around the world, because it's all kind of islands and sea. It's it's like it's a little bit like here's our customary reference in Witcher 3, how just sort of riding on your horse across the land can be enjoyable because kind of the world is a cool place. I felt it's a bit like that, sailing your boat from island to island can be a little kind of relaxing reprieve between whatever you do in those places.
Yeah. And I got to add as well, it's so cool how you unlock different shanties, because there's so many. And when you're cruising around in your ship, the crew just starts singing along, and it's just a random thing. But the more shanties you get, obviously the more songs you get to listen to that your crew sings, and it's just a very pleasant way to sort of sail the high seas in your pirate ship.
It's just a shame that the shanties are such a bitch to catch.
Oh my god, they're terrible, aren't they? So bad.
So for anyone who hasn't played it, you have to catch pages of sheet music that are just kind of floating around on the wind, and because you're in the Caribbean in like the 1500s, there's no tall buildings, and the tall buildings aren't next to other tall buildings. It's so hard.
Yeah, it's one of the small frustrations I have in the game, and there are others, but none glaring, none that stick out like they do in some of the other Assassin's Creed series. So at the moment, all I can say is that I'm really enjoying it. I can't see the game getting that much worse, and so yeah, I'm keen to finish it, but not to get through it, just to see what they can do with the series next, which I've heard isn't much coming up in the recent entries. But yeah, for now, I'll enjoy this as much as I can. So while we're on the topic of open world style games, Timmy has been getting into a newer kind of game, one that I'm really interested to hear about, being a big fan of games like Fallout and Skyrim and all Bethesda sorts of things. You've been getting into open worlds, outer worlds.
Both, yes.
Hey, it's an easy mistake to make.
But yeah, no, absolutely. I having finally gotten around to polishing off The Last of Us 2, I very excitedly got into Outer Worlds, which, when I first got the Game Pass on Xbox, that was the first one that really I went, oh my goodness, that's pretty recent and it's a game I really want to play. So had it downloaded and burning a hole in my Xbox pocket for weeks now, finally fired it up. Um, Adding to my excitement was the fact that I knew it was coming from the folks who did New Vegas, Fallout New Vegas, Obsidian, and it looks pretty cool. But I really didn't look into what it was about at all, so I was kind of going in very blind, and I've been very pleasantly surprised by it. Uh, being pretty unpredictable and surprising me at many turns. So I don't know how much you guys know about it, but essentially the game fires up and you are in a big ship and you have been in stasis for ages, a ship called the Hope, and an alleged terrorist has woken you up out of stasis. And it seems like, the corporation, like one of the big corporations, I'm kind of like coming out of stasis and not really understanding what's going on. They throw you really in the deep end and throw all this bits of information at you, but it seems like some big corporation is kind of in charge of everything, and they've known that the ship's just out there and they've just been keeping you in stasis because it's cheaper than rescuing you and bringing all of this population back. And this guy who's allegedly a terrorist has woken me up specifically and sent me down to the nearest planet on the condition that I help him out with getting different bits and pieces and doing these different things so that we can safely thaw out everybody else, because if we just pull them out of stasis, they have rapid decomposition and stuff like that. So that's the premise. And Paul, I can see you busting with a question straight away.
Yeah, my question is actually not about the story at all. It's kind of a little bit on JT introducing this topic here and saying how we're talking about open worlds. And I'm kind of interested in the open aspect of this. And it's not just me that's interested. We've got a question here from Josh in our Discord channel, who's also wanting to know about how much freedom there is in the Outer Worlds, along the lines of kind of the Bethesda games that it's so often compared to. I guess I'm interested to know how much of an open world game is this?
Well, it's interesting, right? Like JT has said he's really keen for this one because he's a big fan of Bethesda games like Fallout and Skyrim and stuff. And you guys know that I'm a pretty harsh critic of the Bethesda open world games. I, really wasn't a fan of Fallout 4. I think Skyrim is wildly overrated, I I'm not a big fan, but there are elements that I do like, and so I was pretty keen on Outer Worlds. And so far, for me, I would say that it is. How do I put it? The world is pretty open. You can go just about anywhere. It doesn't like cut you off and say you can't do that. It has that very Fallout esque element of you can pick up and take anything and everything. Sometimes it's just picking up random stuff. Other times it's stealing, but you can steal from anyone, anywhere. And if they see you, you get in trouble. If they don't see you, you're fine. I think the game is yet to open up as fully as it's going to. Like I've gone to a couple of different spaceships and 3 planets and stuff, but I still feel like it's about to open up fully after the one I'm on now. That said, like I mentioned, it's not stopping me going anywhere on the planets I've been, whether I'm severely underpowered for that area or not. I can keep a low profile and kind of skirt my way around the areas, or I can go out in a blaze of glory. I don't think I can say it's as big or open as say Fallout 4 or Skyrim, and I don't know that there's quite as many things that you can do outside of the main storyline. Like there's heaps of side quests, but they still feel like tangential to the main story. Whereas I know in Skyrim and Fallout, you can pretty much go, I'm going to ignore that altogether and just do my own thing. Because you need to get to other planets, there are things you need to do in the main story to, get your ship working, to get, landing permits for other planets and stuff that limit you. Well, don't limit you, but they kind of funnel you into doing main story stuff, or at least that's how it's going at the moment.
So these like different planets and things that you go to, is there the freedom to kind of jump back and forth between them? So if there's something on an earlier planet that is higher level, can you go back to that later? Or once you move on to the next planet, do you sort of move on permanently?
No, you can go back and forth.
All right.
Heaps, yeah. Like I have been trying to kind of like do all of my side quests and main missions that are in a certain place at once. Like I'll go, oh, I've got this one here. I've got 4 things on this planet and 2 things on that one. So I'm going to go to this planet with the 4 things first because I can stay there and get them all done. And I'll do something there and it'll be like, all right, report back to the groundbreaker space station and tell this person what you found. And I'll be like, I'm not going to do that yet because I've got other stuff to do here. So, you can move around at will. And sometimes in the main story, they do limit you. Like the first time I went to Groundbreaker, which is kind of like a big space station, my ship got impounded, and so I was forced to do certain things to get that unlocked and stuff. But once I did that, I can go back and forth as much as I like now.
I'm really interested to see what you think about the stylization of the game because as you said before, it's often compared to the Fallout series, and I know that um, I think some of these people were actually working for Bethesda or one of the Fallout games. I can't remember exactly. One.
Obsidian were basically like leading the charge on
Yeah.
New Vegas.
But
Did
I think some of the higher up people worked on the original Fallout and Fallout 2. That's kind of
Right.
yeah,
their
the original.
that's
Yeah.
like where they came from.
So what's your take on sort of the stylization of the game? Because both games are kind of have a style to them. Outer Worlds looks like it's a little bit more stylized, but is there a clear cut sort of this is very much inspired by the fact that these people were working on a Fallout game? Is there
Right.
any obvious things like that, or is it all pretty fresh?
Aesthetically, I think it is a perfect middle ground between Fallout and Borderlands. Like
Right.
just the way
Okay.
the cities look, the guns look, and the armor looks, and also the kind of it's got a sense of humor that reminds me of Borderlands without it being that Borderlands 3 toilet crude sex humor, Like it's kind of like not taking itself very seriously and has that kind of like really western, like country and like western film feel, like a space western. It feels like that. And it's quite colorful. So yeah, like the colors are very bright but it's still like very much dystopian and everything's wrecked and it's still yeah. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it except that I find it a perfect middle ground between Fallout and Borderlands, but it doesn't feel like it's ripping off either of them. It just, it's got all the vending machines and the very kind of like old-timey advertisement stuff that makes it feel like Borderlands, but it's not cell shaded at all. And then
Ho-
from the Fallout side, it's so conversational, and the conversation trees and branching discussions you have feel like Fallout. Like you go to talk to someone, they turn to the camera and it zooms in onto their head a little bit, and they start talking to you, and then you choose from the drop down menu of what you're going to say. And so, in that sense, it feels heaps Fallout like.
It looks like it, from what I've seen, it has that kind of, like you said, like the silliness of Fallout as well.
Yeah, yeah, like it has a lot in common with it. Yeah, yeah. I suppose like when I think back to Fallout 4 and I think about that the robot assistant that you have right from the start.
Mhm.
Like that's the kind of sense of humor it has, you know.
I guess
The
there's
thing
like,
that's
I guess there's maybe a bit of a parallel, like you say, between the Western styling to everything to the Fallout styling of everything is like kind of 1950s. You know, it's
yeah,
like this sci-fi where everything is from the 50s. It's like the sci-fi where everything is a bit Western, and it's an interesting way to do it. You know, it's quite unique.
yeah. But then I feel like in this world, everything is run by corporations, and the corporations own everybody, and not just like they have control over everybody. In order to survive, you need to throw in with one of these corporations as one of their employees, and when you throw in with one of them, you become property of the corporation. And so it's a very on the nose satire of capitalism gone mad, and because of that, that strays more towards the Borderlands kind of side of things to me. I think like just everything's got slogans, and everyone you talk to is talking about these brands and stuff. So that in that sense, Borderlands, yeah, but like I said, it's straight down the middle. It's got so much from both of them, and it uses it in such a way that I think it's still fresh. It's not. It doesn't feel like, oh yeah, this is just Fallout with a Borderlands skin. It's not like that. It's like, oh, this is a really nice balance, and it's made something very unique because of it.
You mentioned the corporations there. That's something I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you about in terms of kind of the story. You said that it's like kind of like an on the nose satire. Do they do anything interesting with that, or is it very kind of like sort of blunt in the way it portrays that? Like, do they go deeper into that to kind of say anything interesting about that sort of like hyper capitalist setting that they've created?
Yeah, they do. They do. Like really early on the first planet that you're on, you are tasked with essentially the first town you go to is owned by a corporation called Space's Choice. And this town isn't doing too well because a whole bunch of people from the town deserted it. They were sick of working, and so they've struck out on their own. So they've essentially left the town, and what the town offers them is protection from marauders and beasts and outlaws and monsters and stuff like that. But they're no longer slaves to this system that works them until they're dead and then charges their families for destruction of company property, because when they die, that is a piece of the company's property dying. So very early on, you're tasked with going and cutting off the deserters' power so that you can divert it back to town, because the town is struggling to meet its quotas. And so you go out and you talk to the people in that village, and they say, "Look, you could cut off our power, but you have to go over there to cut it off. And when you get there, it's going to ask you to divert the power from one place to somewhere else. And you could just as easily divert the power from town to us. And then we would have that protection, and we would and we're doing our own thing. We're not hurting anybody. We're just, living our lives and stuff." And so they give you this moral quandary, and they absolutely do not telegraph one being better than the other. Um, you can talk to heaps of people about this. And in fact, one cool thing I need to touch on is that they give you companions that you choose between your companions to take them out on your various quests. Every time you leave the ship, you say, "Who are you taking with you?" And my companion like surprised me by going, "I really think you should cut off the power to the deserters and send it back to the town. The people in the town are just doing, what they think is right. Like they don't deserve to all of a sudden be exposed." But up until that point, I feel like popular media and especially sci-fi has always conditioned us to be like the corporations are bad and they're keeping people down and they're treating them like numbers instead of people. But my companion raised all these really good points about they might not be perfect, but and the person in charge might not be perfect, but he's genuinely trying to keep the people in there safe. And they've just been trying to do the right thing by the law and by their employers. Like they didn't ask for any of this. And so straight away they gave me a really interesting decision, and I made my decision. And it's one of those games where I am very curious to know what would have happened if I decided the other way, but I haven't wanted to look it up yet because this I want to take the world how it is. Um, so, I don't know if that's the kind of thing you were wondering about, but like straight away they have, flipped some expectations on their heads in regards to what's right and what's wrong and playing in that gray area. And when they're going so on the nose about this is hyper capitalism, but then they go, hey, you know, there's actually a lot of pros to the way these people are living with that system.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I completely agree that so often those kind of stories end up very quickly at a like good and evil kind of perspective of things rather than, like you say, kind of teasing out those nuances. So that's encouraging to hear that it does that.
Yeah, I even had to go back and face the person who I decided against, and I feel like in a lot of other video games, they'd be like, "I can't believe you did this. I'm going to get revenge," or they'll sick the guards on you, whatever. He said, I'm disappointed. I think you made the wrong choice. Like, I don't want to see you again. Like, and that was kind of it. He gave me additional choices, and that's one thing I want to talk about. One thing that I was really struck by in this game is it is super conversational. Um, I find myself spending so much more time talking to people and finding interesting ways to get out of problems with dialogue than I do with combat. And the reason for that is this game is like a true RPG. You have so many skills that you pump the points into and perks. And it's very like similar to like your D&D style stuff where you have like categories that I go, I'm going to put 1 point into dialogue, and that buffs skills in persuasion, intimidation, and lying. And then I go, I'm going to go into tech, and it'll give me medical and hacking and science, like skill points. And then those unlock options when I'm in dialogue. So sometimes I'll be talking to somebody and it'll say, oh, if you had 25 intimidate, you could scare this person off of what they're saying they're going to do. But you do have 25 lie, so you could just bluff your way out of this.
That's great. Like, I loved that stuff in Fallout 3, and I was always disappointed in Fallout 4 because I felt like particularly the speech system was really kind of stripped back, and I tried to kind of play a character that did exactly what you're saying, and I just felt like the game never gave me enough options. So that's super encouraging that kind of thing is back, especially like I know we keep going back to Fallout here, but it's like Fallout was kind of famous for being like the original Fallouts, might have been Fallout 2, where it had like a final boss that you could talk out of fighting you if you had high enough skills. So it's always felt like a series to me where you should be able to do that. And this kind of being, like it's like some kind of spiritual successor to the Fallout series in some sense. That's excellent to hear that kind of stuff is in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have found that I'm really able to play how I want to, like both within a mission and then in the fallout of that. Like I had one mission where I had to go and retrieve some schematics from some lab that had been overrun, and it had all these different optional things. Like I could clear the lab out of all these monsters, or I could just avoid them, or if possible, could you clear out the monsters but leave the mother alive? Because we were doing experiments on that one and we want to keep that intact. And so that means I can avoid them, I can shoot them all, I can shoot some of them, or I can find these gas canisters and try to put them all to sleep. And not only that, while I was in there, I bumped into someone who had stolen the schematics that I was looking for. And they were like, hey, don't help out that person that told you to come and get these. Help out me. I just need you to clear a way for me because there's the law up there. And so then, and there were also other marauders in there, right? So I killed most of the marauders, right? Because that was an optional thing. I decided to go out blazing with them. Couldn't really talk to them. But when I got to the law were ready to blow me sky high. And I managed to convince them to all leave and let the marauder that I was trying to escort go as well. And essentially it was a combination of, persuading by like, talking them up a little bit. And I said like I put in a good word and say that they fought valiantly and they had no choice but to leave and rah 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 and all this stuff. And I felt really in control. I felt like I could have done it in so many different combinations of ways. And that comes down to like the granular game setup stuff as well, because depending on which companions I take with me, they might give me buffs to certain skills because I'm taking this guy with me who's a science expert, so I'm going to be able to hack heaps better. Or this person's got like this vicar here lets me like persuade people heaps better because he looks respectable, etc., etc. And the same thing goes for armor. They give different buffs, but they take away stuff as well.
Bringing this back to Josh's question that we kind of started or talked about earlier on, I feel like the things you're talking about there are the kind of freedom that the Bethesda games have that I like. As in, you said that, maybe this game is not as big in terms of the world size and quite as open as those, but the freedom to be able to approach things in different ways, like you're talking about, like that's more appealing to me than just having, a physically larger or more open world.
Yeah. So I think if we use Josh as a case study, Josh likes to play as a blank slate. He doesn't like to be told who he is. And in this, you choose your own name. It's got an in-depth character creation. Like I said, you can choose to do the missions in whatever way you like. And so I think those are all ticks in the pro column for Josh. But I think Fallout and Skyrim let you go off into the wild and experiment on doing all these different things as much as you want. And I don't think there's as much space for that in this. It's freedom to play the story they're presenting you however you like and as yourself, but it's not necessarily giving you the freedom to create a completely different narrative absent of the story. There was one other feature that I wanted to make sure I mentioned because I think it is so, so interesting. And it's another one of these role playing things. And they call them flaws. And what happens is throughout gameplay, certain things will happen to you and it'll pop up and say, whoops, you've got a flaw. Do you want to accept it or not? And let me give you an example of what one of these is. I got one where I was taking an absolute beating. I kept going into places that where I was underpowered for, under armored for, and getting my ass beat. And of course, you just respawn, right? But it went, whoops, you've taken too much melee damage. And so now you are, I can't remember what they called it, but essentially like I was softened, I was weakened. And so they said you can opt to take 10% more melee damage, but you'll get a perk point, which I can then apply to any of the perks I want. And you get to choose whether you want to accept that or not. So it's kind of up to you as far as the role playing goes. Now, I said no to that one. I didn't like the sound of that. But the button to give myself your inhaler, which is like your med kit in this, is in a really easy place to bump the way I hold the controller. And I kept bumping it and giving myself like inhaler med kits when I didn't need it. And then it popped up and went, whoops, you've been taking too many drugs and now you're addicted. So you need to take that way more frequently, or you'll take negatives to all of your skill points, but we'll give you a perk point. And I went, that's really interesting. And I have been bumping that and like using it more than I wanted to. So I feel like I can role play. I feel like that makes sense for the story that I'm experiencing. So I accepted it. And so now all of my skills, like whether it's long range weapons or melee weapons or hacking or whatever, if I don't, take a puff of my inhaler every few minutes, they all start being impacted. And often I'll forget and I'll go to add points when I've leveled up and I'll be like, what the heck? How come I'm in the red on all of these? Like, what armor did I put on? And I realize, oh, it's because I haven't had my inhaler recently. I'm going through withdrawal. Character gets withdrawals from these drugs. And, I've had other ones pop up. I just think it's a really interesting system. And again, it's that old school pen and paper role playing kind of stuff. Like my dungeon master has said, I'm going to give you this now, deal with it. It's awesome.
I love that. Like, I love a system where it has penalties, not just positives for characters and things like that. Like Project Zomboid has a similar kind of system where you can take negative traits which give you extra points to take positive traits and things like that. And like even in Total War Warhammer, which I've still been playing a lot of, it's like if you lose battles against a certain kind of enemy quite a few times, you get a negative trait, so you have like a morale penalty when you fight them the next time. I love that kind of stuff because it adds like you were saying, it adds like your own kind of unique narrative to the game, right? It's like not everyone is going to have that addiction to the inhaler when they play Outer Worlds, but for you, it becomes like something that was specific to your experience with it.
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, those are the things that really stood out to me about this game, and I think like set it apart from another Alien Planet first-person shooter. One thing I will mention for you, Paul, specifically, is I have found that it's got next to no aim assist on console, and it's made it really difficult in the high-pressure combat situations. So if you're going to give this one a crack, I would say do it on PC for you.
I would, like, there would be no question anyway. I would not have played it on console. But you know what? Speaking of consoles, as we're all done talking about the Outer Worlds here, we've got a little bit of listener mail that we want to touch on before we wrap up the episode. And we've got something from our Discord channel, which we kind of mention and plug here every episode. And this question comes from Sol. And like I said, it's related to consoles here. He asked, would love to hear your opinion on the price increase of next-gen games. So that's PS5 and Xbox Series X, and whether it's justified or not. So just for a bit of context here, people may have heard that sort of one by one, it started to become clear that lots of publishers are advertising their PS5 and Xbox Series X games for $70 US, which I guess that's the price that kind of the whole world then goes from. And of course, that trickles on in places like Australia here, and we get a price increase on our games as well. So what do you guys think about this? Have you got any thoughts on this next gen price increase?
Yeah, I hadn't been paying very close attention because I didn't get a pre-order for day one, so I didn't really look at the game prices, right? But I saw the question come in, and so I had a bit of a look around, and I get the impression that while there are some games that are like I feel overpriced, I feel like these massive prices aren't going to last. Not only because it's perhaps not sustainable to ask your user base to pay $130 for a single game, but more because I looked at EB and JB, and they had really high prices for these games, and some of them were pretty standard across the board. Like I think it was like NBA 2K was like $130, which is just phenomenal. But those games, like you just play them forever. Like it's not like you finish the story and you're done. So maybe the people that are into that game can justify it. But the point I wanted to make was I then went to Big W, and they had the brand new Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and it was $79. And I was like, yeah, that's about standard for a day one release of a AAA title. And Assassin's Creed is definitely that. So I'm not too concerned that every game is going to be that expensive. And I also would be surprised if they remained that expensive. I feel like we might be experiencing, the people making these sports games, who they have to make it for every platform. They've probably had to bring on extra people to get it up to PS5 and Xbox Series X standards, like as an extra, as something they maybe hadn't budgeted for when they started building this game or whatever it might be. So I'm hoping, maybe I'm just being optimistic here, but I feel like we're not going to see games staying quite that high, or at least not across the board. It's not going to be every game.
Yeah, I think I'm in that boat as well, Timmy. I really don't think it's sustainable. But look, if that is how it's going to go, and if it does stay that for any sort of length of time, now more than ever is when people need to start considering, hey, do I really need to pre-order this game? Like, do I need to get this game at launch? This is where you're really going to want to start holding off on just making a purchase based on not much, and start like looking at reviews or looking what the feedback a game gets before you fork out a huge amount of money to pay to play it without playing a demo or something. So that's sort of my opinion on it. I mean, what about you, Paul? What are your thoughts on where the prices are going for the next gen consoles?
I have to say I'm in a very sort of different position, I think, to you guys. Like, I think that this is long overdue, this price rise. Like, games have not increased with inflation for like a decade or more at this point. And like, games are cheaper than they have ever been, and the cost of games has only gone up. So I'm not at all surprised. Like, if I had to predict, I would say that like this is not a temporary thing. Like that $70 US and whatever that translates to here with, you know, the Australia tax that we get put on top of all of these. I think that will absolutely be the new normal, because I think that this, yeah, I'm surprised it's taken this long, to be honest, for games to reach this price point. Like, the only thing that kind of, it doesn't make me question whether they'll say this price. I think they will. But the only thing that makes me kind of question whether this is justified, because I think just in terms of comparing it to the game price in terms of inflation, it absolutely is that publishers have supplemented those income streams which have been lost through inflation through things like DLC and microtransactions over the last sort of decade and a half. And those have come to make up the difference and have meant that game prices don't need to go up. And so that's why we've had $60 US games for a very, very long time now, because what does a game cost? It costs $60, and then it costs like the DLC that you buy, and it costs the little bit that you put into microtransactions. And, you know, that's how they make up that difference. So that's the only thing that makes me kind of a bit kind of uncomfortable here, right? Is that they're already making more than the cost of the game. And so, you know, the price increase is maybe not just because the games haven't increased in line with inflation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm disappointed to hear it, but unfortunately, it makes
Right.
sense.
Well, like, you know,
Yeah,
no one
like-
likes paying more for things, but like, if you look at like the cost of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X in Australia, I think if you adjust for inflation, they cost exactly the same as the last generation of consoles. And
Yeah,
the difference is like $100, but like that's the inflation in 5 or 6 years.
It's interesting. I mentioned NBA 2K, which I saw as being $130, and I thought, well, you know what? You get one of those games a year, and you know, like like I said, there's no story. You can just keep playing that forever. And the people who love FIFA and the people who love Madden and the people that love NBA, like they'll play that year round until the next one comes out. So maybe that's justified considering how much it's going to get played. You get your value for money. But then I was thinking about what you were saying just then about microtransactions and how, you know, like in FIFA you buy those little packs all the time to like get the new players and stuff like that. And I realized, if anything, those are the games that least need need to have that massive price, you know. So
Right.
yeah,
I think another interesting thing here, which we kind of keep coming back to, and it probably suggests that it's going to be important, is the Game Pass issue. Because this kind of the $70 game thing has mostly come from the PS5 side. That's sort of it's been mostly on that platform that these price increases have been announced, because Microsoft they're going all in on Game Pass, you know, like they're not as worried about whether we're going to buy the individual games. They just want you paying your, what is it, like $15 a month. You know, they're happy to just take that from you and then give you all the games. So,
and that's exactly what JT was talking about. Asking yourself whether you need the game at launch, because like Outer Worlds was what 3 months before it was on Game Pass. Like it was recent when I saw it there for the first time, you know.
was it?
So,
I
like,
thought it was there at launch because
Was
they're
it?
owned by Microsoft.
Oh well, there you go. I mean, it took me 3 months to get an Xbox after it came out, so I guess I don't have a frame of reference. But yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Like, you know, so you get some games there, but like, yeah, plenty that end up coming there eventually. Like this, we constantly complain about there are just too many games to keep up with. So much we want to play at all times. So
Right.
you know, maybe it hurts so much when we can wait a little bit.
Right. And I think JT's point is probably true to an even broader extent, in the sense that, like, you know, games are a luxury. You know, like it's not a necessity. And yeah, like maybe if games are more expensive and you can't afford it, like don't buy the game.
Yep.
Just listen to this podcast and we'll tell you how it is.
No, because
Patience
we
is a virtue, guys.
we won't have bought it either.
Well, look, that was a really cool question, and thank you to Sol for sending it through. If you want to get in on the conversation, like Paul mentioned, we are part of the Raptor Mountain Discord server. You can find the link to that off of our Instagram. We've shared about it on Facebook. It's in the description of all of our YouTube videos. Please feel free to join that one, have a chat with us, let us know what you want coming up in the episode. We always chuck in there what we're going to be talking about, so you don't have to listen to the episode and then flick us a tweet and say, hey, but what about this? Like, if you've got a thought or something you want to share, you can get in before we've even recorded and we'll have a chat about it, just like that question from Josh about Outer Worlds. Other than that, if you're not a Discord person and you still want to get in contact with us, we have an email address. It is discanddice@gmail.com. And you can also find us on all of your social media networks: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We're on all of them. Just search Disc and Dice. On Instagram, it is just Disc and Dice Podcast, because we weren't quick enough to get the username ourselves. But look, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you did or didn't like about this episode. Let us know what you want us to talk about. If you got a specific question, we'd love to have a chat about that with you. But look, that'll about do it for us, I think, this episode. But I got nothing. I don't know where I was going to go with that.
We'll just end it. Thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, we're not redoing it. Thanks everybody.
Bye.